In 1951, a woman in Florida burned almost completely to ash inside her apartment. Her chair was destroyed. Part of one leg remained. But newspapers nearby had not caught fire, and much of the room survived. It looked as if reality had broken one of its own rules. It had not. The fire was real. The impossible part was our expectation of how fire should behave. The same pattern appears in other so-called glitches. A room feels remembered before you have entered it. Thousands of people recall the same logo that never existed. An entire drive vanishes from memory. You wake in your bedroom and find a stranger standing beside the bed, while your body refuses to move. These experiences are often treated as evidence of a simulation, parallel timelines, or something hiding behind ordinary reality, but a glitch does not have to occur in the universe. Sometimes it occurs between what happened and what the human mind expected to happen. Déjà vu start with the glitch almost everyone recognizes. You enter a place you have never visited, and suddenly it does not feel new. The room, the conversation, the position of the furniture. For a few seconds, everything seems to be repeating. Some people even feel certain they know what will happen next. Ordinary familiarity has a source. You recognize a face because you have seen it before. During déjà vu, the feeling arrives without the memory that should have produced it. Familiarity and recollection are separate processes. The brain can mistakenly label the present moment as familiar without retrieving any real previous event. Researchers have tested this using virtual environments. Participants explored new locations whose layouts sometimes resembled earlier scenes they could no longer consciously recall. Those hidden similarities made déjà vu more likely. And when déjà vu occurred, participants often felt as though they could predict the next turn in the scene. They could not. Their predictions performed no better than chance. Déjà vu does not reveal the future. It reveals how convincing familiarity can become when it appears in the wrong place. The Mandela Effect. One person remembering something incorrectly is easy to dismiss. Thousands of people making the same mistake feels more difficult. Darth Vader never says, "Luke, I am your father." The line in the film is, "No, I am your father." The Fruit of the Loom company maintains that its logo never contained a cornucopia, even though many people can picture one behind the fruit. And the children's books are the Berenstain Bears, not Berenstein. This is the Mandela Effect, a shared memory of something that apparently never happened. If false memories are random, why do so many people remember exactly the same wrong version? Because these errors are not random. Different brains are exposed to the same patterns. Berenstein resembles a more familiar surname. A pile of fruit suggests a cornucopia. And outside the film, adding Luke tells the listener whom Vader is addressing. Each incorrect version makes intuitive sense. Then repetition does the rest. A misquotation spreads through conversations, parodies, and memes until later versions overwrite the original. The memory is shared because the shortcut is shared. Reality did not change for millions of people at once, and millions of people rebuilt the same missing detail from the same cultural material. Missing time. Sometimes the brain adds a detail that was never there. Sometimes it leaves an entire journey almost blank. You begin driving along a familiar road, you stop at lights, change lanes, and make several turns. Then you arrive home with no clear memory of the last 20 minutes. This experience is often called highway hypnosis. The name suggests a trance, but you are not asleep and your body was not being controlled by anything else. A trained part of the brain can continue steering, braking, and following a familiar road while conscious attention drifts elsewhere. A repetitive journey contains few distinctive moments for memory to preserve. You discover the gap afterward when you search for the drive and find almost nothing. The missing time was lived. It simply was not stored as a clear sequence you could later replay. That does not make distracted driving safe. Fatigue can turn an ordinary lapse into a fatal one. But the absence of a memory does not mean the absence of experience. It means consciousness and memory are not the continuous recording we imagine them to be. The Bystander Effect. Not every apparent glitch occurs inside one person. Sometimes several minds hesitate together. A person collapses in a crowded station. Everyone can see them, but for several seconds nobody moves. Each witness looks at the others, and the stillness spreads through the group. Psychologists call this the bystander effect. When responsibility is divided, each person can assume that somebody else understands the situation or has already called for help. If everyone is privately uncertain but publicly calm, the group can mistake hesitation for proof that nothing serious is happening. But the popular version of this effect is exaggerated. The murder of Kitty Genovese became famous after reports claimed that dozens of witnesses watched and did nothing. Later investigations found that this account was deeply misleading. In recordings of real public conflicts, researchers found that at least one person intervened in more than 9 out of 10 incidents. In clear danger, a larger crowd can actually increase the chance that someone helps. Humans do not automatically become background characters when they enter a crowd. The dangerous moment is ambiguity, everyone waiting for someone else to decide whether the emergency is real. That is why pointing to one person, you, call an ambulance, removes the uncertainty about who is responsible. Doppelgängers. Large numbers can make a crowd more helpful. They can also make an impossible face appear twice. Some unrelated people look similar enough to be mistaken for siblings, or the same person at 2 different moments. For centuries, encountering your double was treated as an omen. In some traditions, seeing a doppelganger meant that death was approaching. Modern researchers approach the question with facial recognition software and DNA. In one study, 32 pairs were compared using facial recognition software and DNA. The closest matches were more likely to share genetic variants associated with facial structure. They did not have identical genomes, and the similarities often ended at the face. Their fingerprints, voices, and lives remained different. A face can vary enormously, but it is still assembled from the same limited anatomical system. With more than 8 billion people alive, extremely rare combinations receive billions of opportunities to occur again. Your double would not be another version of you. It would be probability doing something that looks personal. Sleep paralysis. Seeing your face on a stranger is unsettling. Seeing a stranger inside your bedroom is worse. You open your eyes, the room looks normal. You can see the door, the ceiling, and the furniture around you, but you cannot lift your arms, turn your head, or call for help. Then you notice the figure. Some people see a dark person standing near the bed. Others feel something pressing against their chest. They hear footsteps, breathing, or a voice speaking beside them. Different cultures have interpreted these visitors as demons, witches, ghosts, and night spirits. It usually appears when 2 normal states overlap. During REM sleep, the brain produces vivid dreams while suppressing most voluntary movement. Sleep paralysis occurs when awareness returns before that suppression ends. You recognize the bedroom, but parts of the dreaming system remain active. The brain receives an impossible combination: consciousness, immobility, and fragments of dream imagery. Then it tries to explain what is happening. If you cannot move, perhaps something is holding you down. If you feel watched, perhaps someone is in the room. Once the brain creates an intruder, a coat, a shadow, or an open doorway can provide its shape. The figure feels external because you never consciously chose to imagine it. Sleep paralysis is usually brief and harmless. Stress, sleep deprivation, and irregular sleep can make it more likely. The intruder disappears when waking consciousness and muscle control finally return to the same state. Spontaneous human combustion. Every glitch so far can be traced to memory, attention, probability, or imperception. The death of Mary Reeser appeared to leave physical evidence. On the morning of July 2nd, 1951, Reeser's landlady arrived at her apartment in St. Petersburg, Florida. The metal doorknob was unusually hot. Inside, Reeser's chair and most of her body had been reduced to ash. Part of one leg remained, but much of the apartment had survived. Cases like this created the legend of spontaneous human combustion, the idea that a person could ignite from inside their own body without an external flame. Proposed causes included alcohol, static electricity, digestive gases, and even an imaginary subatomic particle called the pyroton. None had convincing evidence. Human bodies contain too much water to ignite like dry material, and alcohol in the blood cannot turn a person into a bottle of fuel. Investigators repeatedly found possible external flames: cigarettes, candles, fireplaces, or heaters. The real mystery was not how the flame began. It was how a small flame could destroy a body without producing an ordinary room fire. The answer is the wick effect. A flame heats the fat beneath the skin. It liquefies and soaks into clothing, which becomes a wick while the body supplies the fuel. This process can produce low, localized flames for hours. Heat accumulates near the ceiling while nearby objects remain below their ignition temperature. In a BBC experiment, a dead pig was wrapped in a blanket inside a furnished room. A small amount of petrol started the fire. an important detail. But the wick effect then sustained it for hours. The flames destroyed flesh and bone in the burning area and melted a television with heat that collected near the ceiling. Yet large parts of the room remained intact. It demonstrated how extensive destruction and limited surrounding damage could exist together. Reeser was known to smoke and had taken sleeping medication. The FBI concluded that a cigarette likely ignited her clothing before the wick effect sustained the fire. Nothing inside her body spontaneously created a flame, but once the fire began, her body became the candle. Quantum immortality. The wick effect can be demonstrated in a room. The final glitch cannot be observed so easily because the observer, is part of the experiment. Quantum immortality begins with the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Under this interpretation, different possible outcomes of a quantum event do not collapse into one unique result. They continue in separate branches of reality. Now, imagine an observer whose survival depends on a genuinely quantum event. In some branches, the observer dies. In others, the observer survives. The strange argument is that the observer can never experience a branch in which they are no longer conscious. From their own perspective, they would therefore keep finding themselves only in surviving branches, even as survival became extraordinarily unlikely. This idea is called quantum immortality. It is not evidence that anyone is immortal, and it is not an experiment anyone should attempt. It stacks several disputed assumptions on top of one interpretation of quantum mechanics. Many Worlds does not say that one consciousness jumps into the safest universe. It describes different future versions after branching. A version that dies does not transfer its awareness elsewhere. Death is also rarely a clean switch. Injury, aging, and loss of consciousness make the thought experiment far less neat than its popular version. Stories of people surviving several unlikely accidents are sometimes presented as evidence for quantum immortality. They demonstrate only that unlikely events happen, and that survival stories contain an unavoidable selection effect. We can hear testimony only from the branches containing someone alive to give it. The dead do not submit reports. None of these glitches proves that reality is simulated, but the word glitch is not entirely wrong. Something did fail, just not necessarily in the universe. Familiarity appeared without a memory, and millions of people reconstructed the same missing detail. Attention left an ordinary journey almost unrecorded. A crowd mistook shared uncertainty for safety. Probability repeated a face. A dreaming brain placed an intruder inside a real bedroom. A slow fire behaved nothing like the fire people expected. And a quantum interpretation was stretched into a promise it never made. The world feels impossible whenever reality violates the model of reality inside our heads. Usually, the universe did not break. Our prediction did.